Both brothers were questioned extensively about their knowledge of statements of financial condition. The statements include the values of the senior Trump's properties and ultimately determine his net worth. Attorney General Letitia James claims the brothers were aware of and knowingly participated in a long-running scheme to falsely inflate the company's assets, and that the fraudulent values were used to land loans and insurance policies on more favorable terms than they were entitled to. Her expert, Michael McCarty, on Wednesday testified that the banks lost $168 million in interest because of the misrepresentations.
Oh, and by the way, again, the same supposed victims, because it's a totally victimless thing, are saying, no, we did our own due diligence. We made hundreds of millions of dollars.
Judge Arthur Engoron, who was presiding over the trial, stated in a previous order that the banks did make lots of money. But the focus of this trial is on how much more money they could have made if not for the alleged fraud. The judge has already determined that fraud occurred. He now must determine the size of the fine the Trumps are facing. Eric Trump is alleged to have signed several guarantor compliance certificates for his father, and those certificates relied on the financial statements. He testified that he had very little knowledge about those statements. When pressed about a 2013 email with part of a financial statement attached, he conceded he was familiar with them, but said he would not have personally worked on them. The senior Trump took to social media defending his sons and blasting the judge. "Leave my children alone, Engoron. You are a disgrace to the legal profession," he said. Donald Jr. completed his testimony without any cross-examination from defense attorneys. Eric Trump will be back on the stand Friday. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Minnesota's Supreme Court is hearing arguments to prevent former President Trump from running for president. Prosecutors are invoking the Constitution's insurrection clause. This is one of several lawsuits that have been filed around the country to bar Trump from state ballots. Those in favor say the former president's role in the January 6th Capitol breach at the U.S. Capitol disqualifies him. Trump's lawyers argue that the events were a riot, not an insurrection in the constitutional sense. They add that the former president has never been charged with such a crime.
There is no more political question in our constitutional order than who should be president. That's the predominant feature of our national political conversation, and the Constitution itself devotes more words and more provisions to how we decide that question than just about any other. It's for that reason that when parties ask the courts to step into that process and to decide who can or can't be president, the courts overwhelmingly say that's not a decision that should be made in the judiciary. That's a decision that should be made elsewhere. We've had 2 citations of supplemental authority in this case just in the last week or so. Those courts actually took different approaches to this political question issue, but they used exactly the same phrase to describe the precedential landscape. Both of those courts said that the weight of authority holds that this is a political question, not justiciable.
The Colorado and Minnesota.
This whole COVID madness, this so-called pandemic, it was just a test balloon, a gigantic test balloon. Well, for what, you ask? Well, to see how far they could go, to see what exactly they would have to do to get free individuals in a free and democratic society to consent to being forced into compliance. That's what they were trying to establish. That's what they were trying to figure out. And they have figured it out. Trust me, they are much smarter now. The goal ultimately is to transform our free and democratic societies, into totalitarian societies. Their goal is to strip each and every one of us of our fundamental rights of freedom, democracy, the rule of law. They want to get rid of all of this. This whole COVID thing had never anything to do with public health. It never had anything to do with breaking waves. It always had to do with breaking people in order to make us a part of a mindless, malleable mass, which they can totally control, and we will be completely dependent upon this globalitarian elite. So I'm really imploring the people and all the peoples around the world, for God's sake, Stop giving your democratically elected governments the benefit of the doubt. They are not deserving of that. They are not. Stop rationalizing whatever your government is doing. Stop rationalizing and come up with some good intentions. They have no good intentions. Never. As I said before, in the entire history of mankind, there has never been a political elite concerned about the well-being of regular people. And it isn't any different now. Why should it? Stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. Because I can tell you, you cannot comply your way out of a tyranny. It is impossible. Trying to do so, you will only feed a gigantic alligator in the hopes of being eaten last. But guess what? Your turn will come, and then you will be the one swallowed up. I also have to ask the people, end your silence. Speak.
Nicole talked about how the Five Eyes Coalition come together to recognize that Communist China had become the greatest threat to the free world.
I think that when the fact that these 5 countries came together, last month, Ray busted a Chinese plot to infiltrate a prestigious Australian research institution that involved planting an academic there to steal secrets. So in the guise of education, and they actually plant Trojan horses, they're people, they're academics, and we allow them to do that. You know, the spy balloon is, people can see that, right? But what we don't know is what information was relayed back. Yes, we shot the spy balloon down, but what we're not aware of is what information they have stolen and how they're going to use it. If anybody thinks that the CCP is for America, you're not paying attention to anything that you're seeing. And we've been talking about this for a while, but now there's so much more evidence from where we started back in March. You know, now the FBI, Ray said that China had a bigger hacking program than that of every other major nation combined. So China is doing more hacking into people's systems, into their intelligence than all the other nations combined. Think about how big that is. But more importantly, what are they going to do with this information, and how do we stop them?
Rome is not built overnight. The rise of the CCP to be the biggest threat to the U.S. and to our entire free world has happened from a decade ago, from almost 10 years ago. And then in the last 5, 6, what have we been doing? I remember we were talking about Russian hoax. We were talking about Russia. I mean, China was never on top of the list of our law enforcement or intel community. So I think that this Five Eyes partnership, jointly coming together to admit the CCP has become the biggest threat is actually, in fact, a public admission to our own failure, because we allowed this to happen. And now we see that because of the weakness on the part of the U.S., our enemies are acting aggressively in Iran and Russia, North Korea. So I think that's why it's so important for we the people to elect a very strong leaders in the Congress. And now we need a speaker in the House. Yes. We need someone who really cares about America's national interest, who can really put America, we the people's interest above everything else.
Right.
Why is that?
She knew in real time it was a terrorist attack. As Secretary of State, she was traveling from country to country and meeting with leaders, right? Like a Secretary of State does. But in her case, you had to donate money to her foundation to meet with her. Military commanders couldn't get time with her. There were places she didn't even meet, like some of the CIA that thought she'd meet with her. And so
Secretary of State, she is running around the world forcing political leaders to donate money to the Clinton Foundation so that they could get time with the U.S. Secretary of State.
Yeah,
is that legal?
That's the issue with her server. What's on Hillary Clinton's server is all the economic and financial dealings she had in Libya, of course, And then all those other things that she traveled around. And so,
that just got wiped.
yeah.
Just, it's gone.
I mean, there might have been people who got into it.
So this guy was Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and we're known, and we're granting him a visa.
He was granted a U.S. visa. We killed their terrorist family members in Afghanistan. We killed the terrorist family members in Iraq. A lot of these guys we locked up for 20 years, and we didn't lock them up in a nice prison in the United States. They were in Policharki prison. They're on offense now, and they are coming for us.
We are now over a month deep into the biggest waste of New York taxpayer dollars I've ever seen. President Trump's statement of financial condition was so undervalued, but Letitia James, as you've seen, will show up when it's a press day. I said it yesterday on the news. She hasn't been here for days, but you know when she's going to come? When the main event's here, and that is Trump. She piggybacked on Trump to get into office. She didn't do it well enough to be a governor. She was a failed gubernatorial candidate. And now she's working on her politics again. She shows up, sits in the back when she should be doing real work because the city of New York has fallen apart. If you are a business in New York, pay attention. You put your value. If President Trump wanted to inflate his net worth on a statement of financial condition, his brand alone could double, triple it. It's basic. It's basic. This is a waste of time. We heard testimony from an expert this week. Ms. James wasn't here for that day because it wasn't good for her. He's been paid by New York taxpayer dollars $450,000 in the past few months to come here and testify. That's your money. That's not my money. It is a crime. And now these children are being brought in away from their families for doing nothing wrong. It's a great company. It has always been a great company. It's worth a lot more than the statements say, and she just doesn't like it. And now her politics don't allow her to back off or back down. And it's unfortunate. But this case should be done. We are wasting our time. Thank you.
Lisa Stephanie Segal has the details.
According to statistics from the FBI in 2022, the United States saw a 33% decrease in reported anti-Asian hate crimes, with 499 incidents down from 746 in 2021. However, hate crimes in general have been increasing for several years, reaching over 13,000 reported incidents in 2022, primarily targeting race, ethnicity, and ancestry. Black people were victims in 52% of race-related offenses. The FBI adds that their annual report likely underrepresents actual hate crimes due to underreporting and data gaps and law enforcement participation variations.
Here in the United States, our most immediate concern is that violent extremists, individuals or small groups, will draw inspiration from the events in the Middle East to carry out attacks against Americans going about their daily lives.
FBI Director Christopher Wray says concern is rising about anti-Semitism in the U.S., with the Jewish community representing 2.4% of the population, but accounting for 60% of religious-based hate crimes.
Yep. We've already seen that with the individual we arrested last week in Houston who'd been studying how to build bombs and posted online about his support for killing Jews. And with the tragic killing of a 6-year-old Muslim boy in Illinois in what we're investigating as a federal hate crime.
The FBI is addressing this issue through law enforcement efforts and encourages vigilance in reporting of suspicious activities to ensure public safety. Stephanie Segal, NTD News.
As the world is already laughing at us.
While we're dividing ourselves from them, while the nation is focused on internal battles, a greater threat looms on the horizon. Chinese Communist Party.
绝不允许任何外来势力奴役我们，谁妄想这样干，必将头破血流。
They're systematically infiltrating our government. They're stealing our technology and they're attacking our freedoms.
The FBI is opening new China-related counterintelligence case about every 10 hours.
The Chinese are preparing for war. We Americans are very good at being oblivious as to what our enemies are saying. And we did not pay attention to Osama bin Laden until one day he killed 2,977 Americans.
This is not just a battle of ideologies or just about pursuit of dominance. This is a war that will alter the course of our lives. And if we lose, it will condemn our children and future generations to a world of unimaginable horrors. This is why my show in the Epoch Times is so critical. We're not afraid to take on the Chinese regime head on. And he said, they told me that if I keep talking to you, they're going to hire a hitman to chop off one of my hands. We're not afraid to call out the CCP for their atrocities. We're completely independent. Our only interest is in traditional journalism and reporting truthfully. Bizarre news today. The Chinese Communist Party is opening up police stations, departments, and working as overseas bureaus all around the world, including right here in New York. You heard that right. It's time to replace the Chinese regime's propaganda with truth. Get back to the basics. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All you have to do is subscribe to Epoch TV. You'll get so